My mill tried to outsmart me after learning I was buying a house. Clapperboard opening hook. She smiled at me across the dinner table, the same smile she had worn the day she told my partner that I wasn't good enough for their family, and said, "Congratulations on the house, dear. I hope you know what you're getting yourself into." I set down my fork very slowly. Because I did know what I was getting into. I had known for 3 years. I had signed the papers that morning. I had the keys in my bag. The house was mine legally, completely, undeniably mine, and there was not a single thing Margaret could do about it. But she was going to try. She was absolutely going to try. And that, if I'm being honest with you, was the part I had been quietly preparing for. Part 1, How It Started. My name is Arjun Mehra, and I want to tell you something about the kind of man I was before all of this happened. I was careful. Not in the nervous, fearful way. I want to be clear about that. I was careful the way people get when they have learned, through specific and repeated experience, that the world does not automatically make room for you. That you have to make your own room. That you have to be deliberate and patient and strategic about the life you are building, because nobody is going to build it for you, and some people are going to actively try to dismantle whatever you put up. I had grown up in a middle-class family in Pune, the eldest son of parents who had built everything they had from scratch and were deeply proud of it. I had come to Mumbai for work at 23, graphic designer turned creative director, spent 6 years building a reputation and a client list, and a savings account that I treated with the reverence most people reserve for religious objects. I had a 1-bedroom apartment in Andheri that I had furnished slowly and thoughtfully, and I had plans, quiet, detailed plans, that I had been working toward for a long time. One of those plans was the house. A proper house, not an apartment. A house with a small garden and walls I owned, and a room that could be a studio and another room that could someday be something else, something I did not let myself think about too directly yet. I had been saving for 6 years. I had spent 8 months looking. And 3 months before the dinner with Margaret, I had found it. A place in a quiet lane in Bandra West, old building, good bones, a terrace that looked out over a stretch of green that somehow still existed in that part of the city. I had put in an offer the day I saw it. I had not told anyone immediately. That was my way. I tended to hold things close until they were real, until the paperwork was signed, and the thing was mine and nobody could take it away. The only person I had told, before the papers were signed, was Kabir. I need to tell you about Kabir. Kabir Nair was, I am going to take a breath here, Kabir Nair was the most complicated person I had ever loved. And I had loved him, specifically and completely, for 4 years by the time this story begins. I want to be precise about that number because each of those years had weight. We had met at a mutual friend's housewarming, the kind of crowded, noisy gathering where you end up talking to one person in a corner because the rest of the room is too loud, and that person turns out to be someone you cannot stop talking to. He was 31, I was 29. He was an architect. He had these hands, I mention this because it is relevant to the story, not for any other reason. The hands of someone who built things, who drew things, who thought in 3 dimensions. He talked about buildings the way I talked about design, with that specific intensity that only comes when you have given a significant portion of yourself to something. We had talked for 3 hours at that party. He had texted me the next day. Within 3 months, we had become whatever we were, not named yet, not formal, but real, unmistakably real. The thing about Kabir was this. He was warm and generous and deeply, genuinely good in the specific way that some people are good, not because they have never been tested, but because they have been tested and came through it still caring. He was funny without trying to be. He remembered things, small things, things you mentioned once and forgot you'd said, and he had stored them carefully and would produce them months later in the form of exactly the right gesture. He was also, and this is the part that matters for the story, the son of Margaret Nair. Margaret. I want to describe Margaret to you accurately, because she deserves precision. She was 62, originally from Kerala, had spent 40 years in Mumbai, and had the particular bearing of a woman who had decided very early that she knew how the world worked, and had spent the rest of her life defending that knowledge against all incoming evidence. She was not stupid. I want to be clear about that. Stupid would have been manageable. She was sharp and strategic and deeply, unflinchingly devoted to her son in the way that sometimes looks like love and sometimes looks like ownership, depending on the angle. She had been polite to me for the first year. Careful. The kind of careful that is not warmth, but is careful not to become obviously hostile before it has all the information it needs. In the second year, when it became clear that I was not a phase and Kabir was not going to come to his senses and marry the daughter of one of her friends from church, the careful politeness had shifted. Slowly, incrementally, the way a temperature drops, you don't notice each degree, only the accumulated chill. She had never said anything direct. That was the craft of it. Nothing that could be quoted back to her, nothing that could be named and confronted. Just comments. Small, precisely placed. Arjun, you work so hard. I hope you're not neglecting the other parts of life. It must be difficult, your family being so far away. Kabir mentioned your renting, sensible, at your age, not to overcommit. That last one had landed. I had been 31 years old. I had been saving for 5 years. I had smiled and said nothing. But I had remembered. The moment things changed, the moment I stopped simply existing in her presence and started paying close attention, was a Sunday lunch at her house, about a year before the story begins in earnest. Kabir and I had been there for what was meant to be a casual family lunch. His younger sister Preethai was visiting from Bangalore, which always made these gatherings warmer. Preethai was uncomplicated in her affection, the kind of person who gave hugs like she meant them and asked questions because she was genuinely curious and not because she was collecting ammunition. I had always liked Preethai. Lunch had been fine. Good food, easy conversation, Preethai showing us photos from a trek she'd done. And then Margaret had said very casually to Kabir, not to me, to Kabir, as if I were not in the room, I spoke to Thomas' uncle last week. His daughter is back from London. She asked about you. Just that. Kabir had kept eating. His expression had not changed. Good for her, he had said pleasantly. She's doing very well, Margaret had continued. She's bought a flat in Bandra. A pause. I had looked at my plate. Good, Kabir had said in the same pleasant tone. She was always very sensible, Margaret had said. Always knew what she wanted. Another pause. I had looked up then not at Margaret but at Kabir. He had been looking at the table. The muscle in his jaw had done something small and tight. More rice, Preethai had said loudly, to no one in particular, and the moment had passed. But I had filed it away. That was the day I understood what I was actually dealing with. Not a woman who disapproved of me for the obvious reason, though she did. A woman who had a plan, who was patient, who was playing a long game, and who believed with complete conviction that time and pressure and carefully placed information would eventually produce the outcome she wanted. I had gone home that evening and sat at my desk and looked at my savings spreadsheet for a long time. Then I had opened a new tab and started researching properties in Bandra. Part 2, The Architecture of Patience. I want to tell you about Kabir and me properly before I tell you about Margaret's moves and mine, because the love story is the point. Everything else, the house, the confrontations, the long game, everything else is just the frame. The love is the painting. Kabir had a studio apartment in Bandra that was somehow always a controlled chaos. Drawings pinned to every available surface, scale models on shelves, 2 different sizes of drafting pencil in every drawer, and a very specific coffee maker that he treated with the seriousness of a surgical instrument. He made excellent coffee. He also had very firm opinions about natural light and had arranged his entire living space around the one large window that faced east, which meant the sofa was in a slightly inconvenient position, but the morning light was extraordinary. I had started staying over more and more in the second year. Not officially, nothing about our living situation had changed, but gradually and naturally, in the way that people who belong in each other's spaces start accumulating presents. A toothbrush first, then a phone charger, then a spare curta because there had been a rain emergency. Then, slowly over months, a small drawer that was quietly understood to be mine. Kabir had never made a production of this. That was his way. He communicated love in accumulation rather than declaration. Not a single grand statement, but 100 small decisions that added up, over time, to something unmistakable. I had loved that about him. I had also, occasionally, found it maddening because the one area where accumulation had not yet produced a clear answer was the area that mattered most. We were real. We were committed in every practical sense. But we were not, technically, anything. Not named. Not formal. Not the thing that required a conversation with Margaret, with parents, with anyone. And I had been patient about this. I want to be clear that I understood why. Kabir was navigating something that was genuinely difficult. A family who loved him and expected specific things of him. A mother who was strategic and persistent. A whole architecture of expectation that he had grown up inside. I was not unsympathetic. I had my own version of these complications. But patience has a shape, and sometimes that shape starts to feel like a room you're trapped in. The house was part of the answer to that feeling. Not a statement, not an ultimatum, but a decision, a concrete, documented, irrevocable decision to stop waiting for my life to be officially permitted and to simply build it. If Margaret wanted a long game, I could play a long game. I had been preparing for 6 years. I had the savings, the plan, the clarity, and the particular calm that comes from knowing exactly what you want and being willing to do the work to get it. What I had not planned on was Kabir finding out about the house the wrong way. This is the part I need to be honest about. I had been keeping the house search quieter than was entirely fair to Kabir. I told myself I was waiting until it was real, until the papers were signed. I told myself it would be a good surprise. I told myself a lot of things that were all technically true and all slightly beside the point, which was that I was afraid. Not of Kabir's reaction. I knew Kabir well enough to know he would be happy for me, proud of me. What I was afraid of was Margaret's reaction to his reaction. I was afraid of putting Kabir in the middle of something before I had all my pieces in place. In doing this, I had made a mistake. Because Margaret found out first. I still don't know exactly how. The property market in Mumbai is a small world, and I had been talking to an agent who knew another agent who had worked with someone in Margaret's building's residence committee, and somewhere in that chain, the information had traveled. Margaret had known for 2 weeks before the dinner. She had said nothing, had sat on it, held it, thought about it. And then she had invited us for dinner. Kabir had not known. He found out at the table, the same moment I realized she knew. I saw it in his face when she said, "Congratulations on the house." The slight confusion before the understanding before the careful blankness he put up when he needed to think. He had looked at me across the table, a question in his eyes. I had looked back at him. "I owe you a conversation," my eyes said back. "I know." Margaret had watched both of us with that small, precise smile. She thought she had cornered me. She thought she had found the gap, the secret keeping, the fact that Kabir hadn't known, the discomfort of all of it surfacing publicly at her dinner table. She thought I would be rattled. I was not rattled. I was, if anything, relieved. The thing was out, the house was signed, the keys were in my bag. And now we could begin. Part 3, the drive home. The dinner ended with the particular controlled pleasantness of a table full of people who are all thinking things they are not saying. Kabir drove. I sat in the passenger seat and watched Mumbai at night go past, the lit-up overpasses, the clusters of street stalls still going at 9:30, the particular texture of the city after dark. He was quiet in the way he got when he was working something through, jaw slightly set, one hand on the wheel and one resting on the gear shift. I waited. "You found a house," he said finally. "I signed the papers this morning," I said. "When did you?" 8 months, I said. "I've been looking for 8 months. I found it 3 months ago." He was quiet again. The car moved through a long stretch of road. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, not accusatory, genuinely asking. I looked at his profile, at the man I had been with for 4 years, who still made my chest do things it had absolutely no professional business doing, who had a scale model of a community center on his desk that he had been working on for 6 months because the project mattered to him and he did not do things halfway, who had once, driven 40 minutes at midnight because I had texted saying I wasn't okay, without asking what was wrong, just coming. Because I was afraid, I said, honestly. Not of you, of what it would mean, of the conversation it would start with your family before I was ready. He absorbed this. That's a decision you made for both of us, he said. Yes, I said. I know, I'm sorry. Another long pause. Can I see it? He asked. I turned to look at him. The house. Yes. Now. It's 9:30, he said. Is it far? 15 minutes from here. He changed lanes. Tell me the address. We parked in the quiet lane outside the house at 9:45. The street was mostly asleep. A few lit windows, a chai stall at the corner still doing business, a cat sitting on a compound wall with complete composure. The house was dark, obviously, the keys in my hand now because I had taken them from my bag when he asked for the address, holding them with the particular weight of something new. Kabir sat for a moment, looking at the building through the windshield. It was not immediately impressive from the outside. Old construction, maybe 60 years, a short flight of steps up to the main door, a garden on the left side that needed attention but had good bones, a mango tree at the back that I had noticed on the first visit and decided was non-negotiable. The terrace was not visible from here. It's beautiful, Kabir said. I looked at him. He was still looking at the building. The proportions, he said quietly. Old Bombay construction, they knew what they were doing. He tilted his head slightly. Is that a mango tree? In the back garden, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Take me in, he said. We went in. I had a torch on my phone, and we moved through the empty rooms in that warm, narrow light. The front room that would be the main space, the second room that I had already decided, was the studio. The kitchen with its old tilework that I intended to keep exactly as it was. The terrace reached through a narrow door and a short staircase. We came out onto the terrace, and the city was there, soft and lit, the stretch of green below and the sky above, and Kabir standing at the parapet with his hands resting on the edge, looking out. I stood a little behind him. Arjun, he said. Yeah. This is exactly right, he said. I released a breath I had been holding without knowing it. He turned then and looked at me in the dark, just the city light from below and the phone torch from my hand, and I could see on his face something that had been sitting behind his eyes for a while, something that the dark and the empty house and the unguarded moment had allowed to the surface. I should have made things clearer, he said. A long time ago, about us, about what I want. I keep waiting for the right moment, and there is no right moment, there's just this one, the one that's happening. I looked at him. I don't want a drawer in your apartment, he said. He stopped, looked around at the empty rooms around us, the terrace, the mango tree invisible in the dark below. I want this. Whatever this becomes, I want to be part of it. I was quiet for a moment. That's a big thing to say in a dark, empty house, I said. I know, he said. I'm saying it anyway. Something in my chest that had been braced for a very long time simply released. Okay, I said. Okay. Yes, I said. Okay, come help me build it. Part 4, Margaret's first move. She called Kabir the next morning. I know this because Kabir told me, later that day, with the specific expression he wore when he had spent time managing something difficult and was now debriefing. He came to my apartment. We had not yet decided anything about living arrangements. That conversation was still ahead of us, and sat on my sofa and said, My mother called. I know, I said. She said she found out about the house from Rajan uncle's wife, who knows your property agent. Small world, I said. She wanted to know why I hadn't told her. What did you say? I said I found out last night. He paused. She said she was worried, that buying a house is a very big decision and she wanted to make sure I was being properly consulted. I looked at him. She wanted to make sure you were being properly consulted about a house that is in my name. Yes. That is not your decision or hers, I said. I know that, he said. I told her that. What did she say? He was quiet for a moment. She said she just wanted what was best for me, and that she hoped this wasn't going to complicate things for my future. I absorbed this. The word future, doing what Margaret always did with it, weighted, directional, a needle pointing toward a specific outcome. She's going to make this difficult, I said, not upset, just clear. Probably, Kabir said. He looked at me steadily. I want you to know that I'm not going to let her. Kabir. I mean it, he said. 4 years, I have let too many things go because it was easier. That's over. I believed him. I also knew, because I had been watching Margaret for 3 years and because I was not naive about the mechanics of family pressure, that the difficulty would not come from Kabir. It would come at Kabir, through him, in ways designed to make him feel guilty, responsible, torn. Margaret had not gotten this far by being obvious. The first move was the cousin. 3 weeks after the dinner, Kabir mentioned, carefully, that his cousin Sanjay was looking for an investment property. In Bandra, as it happened, and had heard, through family channels, that Arjun's new house was in a very good lane, excellent resale value, the kind of property that was getting harder to find. I listened to Kabir tell me this, and I watched his face very carefully. She asked Sanjay to make an offer, I asked. She suggested he might be interested, Kabir said. She thought, he stopped, exhaled. She thought if someone in the family made a competitive offer and the amount was right, you might consider it. I sat with this for a moment. My house, 3 months before I had even moved in. Margaret had found a buyer and was trying to purchase my house out from under me. It was, I had to admit, a bold move. Audacious, even. It had a clean logic to it. If I no longer had the house, then whatever I had been building, the stability, the independence, the irrevocable peace of my own life, would be undone. I would be, once again, a man renting an apartment, overcommitting for his age, not yet certain. I looked at Kabir. It's not for sale, I said. I know, he said. I told her that. Good, I paused. Is Sanjay aware this was her idea and not mine? I don't think Sanjay knows the full context. That's fine, I said. He will eventually. Kabir looked at me carefully. What are you thinking? I'm thinking, I said, that your mother underestimates me, and I'm going to let her keep doing that for a while longer. Part 5, the second move. Margaret's second move was subtler, and in some ways more elegant. She began, in the weeks following, to be suddenly and conspicuously interested in the renovation. Kabir had mentioned to her, during one of their regular calls, that I was planning to renovate the house before moving in. New electrical wiring, kitchen updates, work on the garden, normal first-time homeowner things. Margaret had said, "Oh, how wonderful, I have an excellent contractor, very reasonable, very reliable. I've used him for years." And she had shown up 2 weeks later at the house, with the contractor. I had been there when they arrived. I was standing in the garden with my own contractor, a woman named Farida who had been recommended to me by 3 separate people I trusted, who had looked at my plans and my budget and told me exactly what was realistic and what wasn't, which was the only kind of professional I had ever wanted to work with. We had been going over the garden. Margaret had come through the gate with an older man and a cheerful expression and said, "Arjun, I hope you don't mind. I thought we'd pop by. This is George Uncle. He did the entire renovation on our building 3 years ago. I thought you might like to meet him." I had smiled at her. "Hello, Margaret," I had said pleasantly. "I don't think you've met Farida. She's heading up the renovation." A beat, a very small, very controlled expression on Margaret's face. "Oh," she said, "you've already hired someone." 3 weeks ago, I said. "We're making excellent progress. Would you like the tour?" I had given her the tour. I had shown her everything, Farida's plans, the timeline, the budget breakdown, the specific tile choices I had already made for the kitchen. I had been warm and informative and completely, immovably in possession of my own space. George Uncle had looked mildly confused about why he was there. I had been very kind to him. Margaret had left an hour later with her contractor, and her cheerful expression, and her smile that did not reach her eyes. On the way out, she had said, quietly, just to me, while Kabir was in the back garden with Farida, "You're very organized, Arjun." "I try to be," I said. "Kabir is lucky," she said, in a tone that meant something slightly different from the words. "I think so," I said pleasantly. "See you Sunday." Part 6. What Kabir didn't know. Here is the thing about Kabir that I need to tell you. He was loyal. Deeply, consistently loyal, not the kind that blinds you, but the kind that is deliberate, that has looked at the available options and made a choice. He had been choosing me in the ways available to him for 4 years. That was real. But he had a specific blind spot when it came to his mother. Not blind to her faults, he knew her faults. He could describe them to me with the clear-eyed precision of someone who had spent a lifetime studying a person. He knew she was strategic. He knew she wanted things and maneuvered toward them. He even knew, I think, that her specific maneuvering around our relationship had a shape and a goal. What he couldn't always see was the scale, the persistence, the specific cumulative effect of 100 small moves over 3 years, each one deniable on its own, adding up to something significant. Because he experienced them one at a time, I experienced them as a pattern. This is why I had not told him about Sanjay's offer in any detail. I had simply said, "Not for sale," and moved on. This is why I had not described the contractor visit as what it was, an attempt at infiltration, but had simply handled it and mentioned it later as a pleasant thing Margaret had tried to do. I was not deceiving him. I was managing the information load, and I was choosing not to make him the site of the battle. Because that was what Margaret wanted. She wanted Kabir to be the arena, wanted me to put things in front of him that would make him feel torn, guilty, responsible. She wanted to use his loyalty against him, to make being with me cost him something he'd keep paying. I was not going to let the person I loved become the battlefield. So I was building something else, quietly, methodically, with the patience of someone who has been preparing for a long time. There was one evening, about 2 months into the renovation, that I want to tell you about. Not because it was dramatic, it wasn't. Because it was the kind of moment that matters more than the dramatic ones. Kabir had been helping me at the house on a Saturday. We had been working on the garden together, clearing the overgrown back section, cutting back what needed cutting, figuring out what to keep. He was good with his hands in the specific way architects tend to be, all practical precision and good spatial sense, and we had worked well together in the comfortable silence of 2 people who don't need to fill every moment with talk. We had taken a break in the late afternoon, sitting on the terrace steps with cold water and the city below us going gold. He was dirty from the garden, his old shirt with a smear of soil across the shoulder, and he was looking out at the view with the particular stillness he got when something had settled in him. "I've been thinking about something," he said. "Tell me." "I've been thinking about what I want," he said. "Not what I've been managing or navigating or trying to make work, what I actually want." I waited. "I want to tell my mother clearly," he said. "Not a hint, not a deflection, clearly, that this is my life, that you are my life, that she is welcome in it if she can accept that, and I love her and I hope she will, but that the answer is not going to change." I looked at him. "I should have said it a long time ago," he said. "I know that." "Why now?" I asked. He looked at the house behind us, the walls coming together, the new wiring, Farida's careful work showing in every room. "Because watching you build this," he said, "has made me understand something about the difference between waiting for permission and deciding." I sat with that for a long time. "Don't do it for me," I said finally. "I'm doing it for me," he said. "You're the reason I'm ready, but the decision is mine." I looked at this man, in the late afternoon light, with soil on his shirt and 4 years of our life in his face, and more patience than I deserved and more courage than he gave himself credit for. "Okay," I said. "Okay," he said. He did not do it immediately. He took another 2 weeks. He thought about it and prepared and chose the right moment with the care he brought to everything. And then he went to see his mother on a Thursday afternoon. He called me that evening. "I told her," he said. "How did it go?" A pause. "She cried," he said. And then she was quiet for a long time, and then she said she needed time. That's fair, I said. She also said, he stopped. She said she was afraid I was making a decision I'd regret. What did you tell her? I told her the only thing I'd regret was waiting any longer, he said. I closed my eyes for a moment. You okay? I asked. Yeah, he said. I'm okay. I'm really okay. I believed him, and something in me that had been watching the horizon for a long time allowed itself to look somewhere else. Part 7, Margaret's final move. But Margaret was not done. I want to be fair to her here. I think what she did next came from a real place, from genuine love for her son, however tangled and controlling that love had become. I don't think she was purely calculating. I think she was a woman who had spent her life believing that she knew best, who had done things her way and built what she had built, and who was genuinely, deeply afraid. Afraid of losing her son's centrality in her life. Afraid of a future that didn't look like the one she had mapped. Fear makes people reach. What she did was this. She contacted my parents. Not directly, she didn't have their number. But she knew, through the general information she had been collecting over 3 years, the name of the company my father had worked for before he retired. She had found, through some channel I still haven't fully traced, my father's old colleague, and through that colleague had sent a message, a carefully worded, very concerned, neighbor-to-neighbor message, expressing that she was worried about her son and a decision he was making, and that she wondered if perhaps a conversation between families might be helpful. My father called me on a Tuesday evening, with a tone I had not heard from him in years. A woman called Nair called Suresh uncle, he said. What is happening? I drove to Pune the following weekend. This was not how I had planned to have this conversation with my parents. I had a plan. I had always had a plan. A careful, thoughtful way of introducing this part of my life that I had been building toward. Not a performance, not a production, but a considered conversation that I was in control of, that happened at a time of my choosing, in a way that was mine. Margaret had taken that choice from me. I drove to Pune on a Saturday morning, and I sat at my parents' kitchen table, the same table where I had done homework as a child, where my mother made tea that was too sweet and my father read the paper, and I told them the truth. All of it. Kabir, 4 years, the house, Margaret, the whole complicated architecture of the life I had been building. My father listened in silence. My mother cried, not in the way I had feared, not in the way that was anger or rejection, but in the complicated way of a woman who had just been handed information that reordered things she thought she knew. She cried and she held my hand and she said, "Why didn't you tell us?" I was afraid, I said, the same answer I had given Kabir. Of what? My father asked. I looked at him, this man who had built everything from scratch, who had passed to me a specific and functional belief in the importance of doing your work carefully and keeping your own counsel and not asking for things to be handed to you. Who had, in ways he didn't always articulate, taught me how to build a life. That something would change, I said. My father was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Are you happy?" The question surprised me. Of all the questions, that one. Yes, I said. I think I'm the happiest I've ever been. He nodded once, the nod of a man processing something significant and filing it. Then bring him, he said. We should meet him. My mother looked at my father. My father picked up his tea. My mother wiped her eyes and said, "I want to make proper food, not just snacks. If I'm meeting someone important, I'm making proper food." I started crying then. Quietly, without warning, the way you do when you have been braced for something for so long that its absence undoes you. Part 8, The Reckoning. Now I want to tell you what I did about Margaret. And I want to be precise about this, because the revenge in this story is not what you might expect. It is not dramatic. It does not involve scenes. It does not require anyone to be publicly humiliated. The revenge was the house. Let me explain. 3 weeks after my visit to Pune, after Kabir had talked to his mother, and I had talked to my parents, and all of us were in various stages of figuring out what came next, I invited Margaret to the house. Not for a confrontation, not to rub anything in. I invited her for tea on a Sunday afternoon, and I was completely genuine about it. The renovation was nearly done. The house looked like itself now, the old tile in the kitchen gleaming, the studio set up with good north light, the garden cleared and starting to grow back green, the mango tree unpruned and magnificent. The terrace was exactly as I had imagined it. She came. Kabir was not there. I had asked him not to be, and he had understood why, or at least had trusted me enough not to ask. I made tea in the new kitchen. I brought it out to the garden, where I had set up 2 chairs in the late afternoon shade. We sat. She looked around the garden for a long time without speaking. "It's beautiful," she said finally. "Thank you," I said. More silence. "I called your father's colleague," she said. Not an apology, but a statement, an acknowledgement. "I know," I said. "I was worried about Kabir," she said. "I know that too," I said. She looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time, not assessing, not strategic, but looking at me the way you look at someone when you have run out of other options. "What do you want from him?" she asked, directly. It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. I set down my cup. "I want," I said carefully, "what I already have. A partner who is good and honest and builds things, a life that is real. This house, which I have worked for and saved for and planned for 6 years. And eventually, not now, but someday, a family that is not 2 separate things to manage but one thing." She was quiet. "That last part," I said, "includes you. Whether you decide to be in it or not is your choice, but the invitation is open." I looked at her steadily, not unkindly, but with complete clarity. "I am not going anywhere," I said. "The house is mine. Kabir has made his decision. My parents are coming to visit next month. Things are moving. You can move with them or you can stay where you are, but the movement is not stopping." Margaret looked at the garden for a long time. "He's happy," she said, quietly. Not a question exactly. "Come for Sunday lunch," I said. "See for yourself." The Sunday lunch was 3 weeks later. Kabir's mother and my mother in the same kitchen was, I will admit, an experience I had not fully anticipated. My mother had arrived with approximately 4 containers of food and had immediately assessed the kitchen and begun coordinating with Kabir's mother in the specific way that 2 women who are both excellent cooks assert competence around each other. Initially territorial, then collaborative, then frankly unstoppable as a combined force. Kabir's sister Preethai had come up from Bangalore. My father sat in the garden with Kabir and discussed the architectural history of the building with the interest of a man who had worked in construction for 30 years and still found the field genuinely absorbing. Margaret had arrived quietly and taken in the room. The full room, all of us in it, the food coming together, Kabir laughing at something my father said from the garden window. I watched her look at her son. I saw the thing that was underneath all the strategy and the maneuvering and the careful moves and the phone calls and the contractors and the cousin with the offer. I saw what all of it had actually been about, which was this: she loved him. She had loved him so fiercely and so completely that the fear of losing him had become its own kind of damage. And seeing him there, in this house, genuinely happy, genuinely himself, I watched something in her face that had been held very tight for a very long time begin, slowly and imperfectly, to loosen. She came to find me in the kitchen. "Arjun," she said. "Margaret," I said. A pause. "The garden," she said. "I have a rose cutting, a particular variety, if you want it." It was the smallest thing, a rose cutting. It was also the largest thing she had offered me in 3 years. "I'd like that," I said. She nodded once, and went back to the kitchen to argue with my mother about the correct proportion of cardamom in chai, which was an argument my mother was going to win, but that Margaret was going to put up a good fight about. I stood in the doorway of my kitchen, in my house, listening to the sounds of people I loved being imperfectly present in the same space. Part 9, What the House Became. 6 months after I signed the papers. The renovation is finished. The garden is growing. There is a rose cutting in the corner bed that has taken root and put out 3 small leaves, which I consider a good sign. Kabir moved in on a Thursday in October, with 3 carloads of books and drafting equipment and the very specific coffee maker, which now lives on the kitchen counter and which I have been informed is not to be moved for any reason. The studio has north light and 2 desks, mine and his, side by side, different enough in their arrangement to be clearly distinct, close enough for what they are. We work there in the mornings sometimes, both quiet, both working, the city below and the mango tree outside the window doing what mango trees do in October. My parents came to visit, and my father walked through every room with the thoroughness of a man who is assessing something and approving it, and at the end said simply, "Good bones," which, from my father, is a standing ovation. Margaret came for Sunday lunch again, and then again. It is not simple, family is never simple, and there are moments still of careful navigation, of old patterns surfacing, of work that hasn't finished. But the rose cutting is putting out new leaves, and she asked me last week if I wanted the name of a good nursery in the area, and I said yes, and wrote it down. Kabir found me on the terrace last Sunday evening, standing at the parapet with tea going cold in my hands, looking at the city in the way I have always done when I need to think. He came and stood beside me. "What are you thinking about?" he said. "The long game," I said. "Who won?" I looked at the city, all those lights, the accumulated life of a place that had held me for 6 years, while I built something worth staying for. "Everyone who decided to show up," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached over and stole the tea from my hand and drank it. "That's mine," I said. "You weren't drinking it." "I was thinking with it." "You can think with my tea," he said. "I'll make more." He went inside. I heard the specific sounds of him in the kitchen, the coffee maker, then the kettle, then the drawers that I knew by now were always in the wrong order for him because I organized them my way, which led to a recurring small argument that had, by this point, become a kind of ritual. I turned back to the city. 6 years of saving, 8 months of searching, 3 months of Margaret and contractors and cousins and phone calls across the map. A Thursday night in an empty house with a phone torch and a man who said, "I want to be part of it." I looked at the mango tree, dark now, just a shape against the city glow. Here I am, I thought, all of it here. Clapperboard final hook. Margaret tried to buy my house. She tried to send her contractor. She contacted my family. She played every card she had, carefully and patiently, because she is a woman who knows how to fight. And she lost. Not because I beat her at her own game, though I was always going to win that one. She lost because the thing she was trying to prevent had already happened. 4 years ago, at a party, in a corner, talking to a man I couldn't stop talking to. That was already done. You can't outsmart what's already real. The rose cutting is in the corner bed. There are 2 desks in the studio. The mango tree is going to be spectacular in summer. And the keys have been mine all along. If this story hit something in you, if you recognized the careful patience, the quiet game, the love that builds instead of demands like this, share it and subscribe. There are more stories like this coming. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to fight quietly, patiently, without anyone seeing, for something that was already yours? And one last question. Margaret has a second move that I haven't told you about yet. Something she did between the contractor visit and the Sunday lunch that changed something, quietly, in a way that surprised even me. Should I tell you what she did? Part 2 is coming. Eyes. Subscribe. You will not want to miss it. The Revenge Chronicles.